Now I would like to introduce Paul Grignon, one of our keynote speakers. He is a world-renowned documentary filmmaker, monetary reformist, and he has some great ideas that I think everybody would benefit from at least listening to. So please give a warm welcome to Paul Grignon.
Hello, and thanks for coming out. I wrote this as a crowd exercise, so we're going to imagine that we're standing in a crowd, and money is the topic, obviously. So what I want you to do is tune up your thinking cap and imagine that the person on your left is a money lender. And it doesn't matter if they're a bank, doesn't matter if it's fiat money, doesn't matter if it's a gold coin. Imagine the person on the left is going to lend you $20 bill. Okay, so imagine that that $20 bill is now passed through the whole crowd, series of exchanges. People are buying and selling. They're using the money as a medium of exchange. And at the very far end of the crowd, where you can't see them and you don't really know about them, someone, instead of spending that $20 bill, lends it to someone else. Okay, that's at the far end of the crowd. The second person has lent the same $20 bill. Now that $20 bill gets exchanged through, and I'm going to say that it went through 100 exchanges to get to that second lender, and it takes 100 exchanges to get back to you, and you pay it back to the person on your left. Now you see the situation we got here? Your debt's been paid off, but the other debt at the other end of the crowd is dependent on that $20 bill because the debt's only payable in money. You get my point? Has anybody seen that?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's what I call a mathematical predicament. And I have been trying to point this out to economists for 3 years now, like literally writing in their blogs. And just this week I've been invited to submit my ideas to the peer-reviewed academic establishment. And it came two invitations in a row, one from a science journal and one from the World Economics Association. So the unqualified can make inroads if you make enough if you make enough sense, I suppose. So well, I just jumped all the way through this whole thing. The reason I said there's only one $20 bill is because if all money were in this situation, there would be no $20 bills to substitute for that one. So that was the reason, and I have looked at, if you looked at the ratio of M2 to M1, which are money supply aggregates, you see that that's right, it's roughly a ratio of 3. We think that possibly every dollar created in the banking system ends up being lent 3 times as existing money by people like us. Because fundamentally, when I said the secondary lender, when you put your money into a bank, you are lending it to the bank. When you lend it to the bank, it is never coming out into circulation except as some form of loan. So you see, once you put your savings in, that money was borrowed by somebody as a loan. And as long as you have it, they're never going to get it. And not only that, but on top of that, there are many people who are private lenders of credit. And private lenders of credit can keep rolling over their money forever. I know several people personally who are doing that. And one of them, his father probably earned the money in the 1950s. And that was somebody's loan in the 1950s. And that money was never available to them to pay off their loan. So what does that mean? That means that they had to pay their loan, assuming they did. They paid it with the money from somebody else's loan. Now, I have to backtrack here to explain, for those who may not be familiar with my movies, I'll just start with explaining the money system in its most basic, the most basic explanation. You start with cash, legal tender. The paper money in your wallet says legal tender on it. The other form of legal tender is coins. Now, coins, the government just mints the coins and sells them to the banks at face value. Some coins they lose money on, and some, that's why the penny's going to be gone, by the way, because it costs more to make a penny than it's worth. And the cash, the paper cash, is created when our national central bank, the Bank of Canada, buys debt. And generally, in normal circumstances, they only buy Canadian government debt, Canadian government bonds are bought, and the central bank creates brand new legal tender to buy these bonds. That's where our cash money comes from. So even our cash money, the paper money in your wallet, is a debt. It's national taxpayer debt. The trick with national taxpayer debt is that we never pay it off. We just pay the interest. Now the interest, a lot of people think, oh, the banks get all the interest. Well, actually they don't. And I've checked this out. I've researched all this stuff from the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, and the European Central Bank. And then I checked it all with a professor in Europe to make sure I had the European Central Bank part correct. And in every case, the central bank creates the cash for the economy, and it does so by buying, for the most part, national taxpayer debt. And since the cash supply, the legal tender supply, is always increasing, the actual national debt does never go away. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we just keep paying more and more and more interest on it until it was, it's unbreakable. So at this point, the Fed, of course, has dropped interest rates to zero because we can't afford to pay interest on these things anymore. The banks can't. Anyhow, oh, where was I going to get to? I better check my notes. So, when you go to a bank and you have your numbers in the bank account and you think that that's money, right? We all think that we have money in the bank. But we actually don't. We only have promises of legal tender. What the bank is doing is that when you have a bank account with a positive number in it, the bank has promised you legal tender on demand, so that you go into the bank and you ask for cash and you get cash, right? That's all our personal experience. You start from there. And what the banks do is when you take out a loan, they put money in your account. They give you positive numbers in your bank account. And how does the bank do that? Did they put paper money into something? No, they didn't. What they did is you signed a loan document saying, I owe the bank $100,000 plus interest over time. And the bank says, well, that guy just gave us $100,000. So we better give him $100,000 to balance the books. So they give you a positive bank account for $100,000. It's just the numbers. And if you never take it out in cash, they don't need the cash to cover it. So in any advanced society like ours, where we have multiple ways of using our checkbook money, the numbers in our accounts, we don't use cash that much anymore. It's literally almost obsolete. The banks typically only have 3% of the cash that they promise us. Everything else is just what I call checkbook money or bank credit. And in the total economy, roughly 5% is pretty typical for how much actual legal tender currency exists. The other 95% is all promises to pay legal tender that doesn't exist. And it doesn't really matter, because what we are doing our business in is promises of paying it back. So what bank credit actually is borrower credit. The borrowers have promised to pay the bank back, and that's what creates the money. And that is what creates the problem, because all of these debts are payable only in money. Now see, in that example of circulating the $20 bill through the crowd, if there were a problem paying either of those debts and the lender would accept payment in kind, in labor or chickens or eggs or what, payment in trade, there'd be no problem. But when they only accept payment in money, and money is a thing in itself in limited supply, you're stuck, right? You have to get money. And this is what my whole theorem, it's almost embarrassing to have to say I'm going to have to write a peer-reviewed scientific paper to tell somebody that you can't pay $50 a debt with only $20 in existence. But that's what it comes down to. So I'm obviously not reading my speech that I spent a lot of time preparing, but I have actually been working from basic principles trying to figure out what is the solution to this. And when I came up with this what I call the twice lent money theorem, I realized that the fundamental problem is money as a thing in itself. Money as a thing in itself is what I call the coin concept of money. Now, that's a single uniform commodity in limited supply. That's the definition I use. And you could use anything in that definition: coins, barley, puka shells. I mean, cowrie shells were actually money in a large part of the world for centuries because they were hard to get, right? So that principle is because we had no technology for being able to transfer value from one place to another and between people who didn't trust each other. That's why we needed coins. Before coins were invented, there is a much older concept of money that worked for centuries, thousands of years. But it was never any good for long distance trade because people needed to know and trust each other to use this system. But now that we have world-spanning technology, this old concept, the oldest concept of money, is actually the one we need to adopt. And that is a concept of money in which money is backed by the goods and services that you're going to buy with it. And that logically turns around that anybody who could produce value and have people trust them to deliver on their promises has the innate power to create money.
Yes! Yes!
And that's all of us. Now, in a real world, I have in Money is Debt 3, Evolution Beyond Money, I actually went and took this so far beyond what I thought I was going to do with it, because I thought out all kinds of factors. How do we replace all of the functions in our current society with this model of money, and what could we do with it that would make society better? Well, I came up with a system that's self-balancing, automatically enforces balanced budgets on everyone, including government,
yes,
makes it impossible to put a debt onto future generations, requires that all profits be spent in order to be a profit, so that you can't profit from a profit. You spend your profits once. Gosh, I said, look at the list. There's an enormous list of benefits by turning the concept of money into what I call something specific, a promise of something specific from someone specific. And that covers a promise of gold, it covers a promise of silver, it covers the promise of tax receipts, which is basically what fiat money is. People say fiat money is worthless. Well, you may not like what the government does with your money and your tax money, but it is a service. And one of the basic services we do get is, as much as we may or may not like them at any given moment, having a justice system and police is one of the basic things that makes a society a society. Head over to Libya if you don't believe me. So, fiat money is not worthless unless the government spends way more than it taxes back. And that is our fundamental problem. The fact that the governments just keep running up the bill. Why do they run up the bill? Because we don't want to pay the taxes for the services we get. So we're all part of this. And the thing is that we could all be part of changing it. And it is changing. There are already several alternative currencies out there that people have been working with. They're all basically based on the self-issued credit, a promise of something specific from someone specific. And worldwide, there's a huge growth in business-to-business barter networks. Now, these business-to-business barter networks, my reasoning, as much as we might be anti-corporate, my reasoning is none of these big organizations are going away. So what I'm trying to offer is something that's good for them and good for us. Because governments would no longer be in debt. Corporations General Motors wouldn't go begging for a bailout. They would just produce credits against General Motors cars. And in any of these cases, when the actual issuer of the credit for goods issues these credits, they have to be voluntarily accepted. Another feature of this is that right now, when a corporation we might hate borrows money from a bank and spends it, the money's not labeled Monsanto or any other name, but in this new system it would. If you don't want to accept Monsanto's money, don't let it pass through your hands.
Yeah! Yes!
And the other factor of this is that we could start this at the grassroots. I think it would be wonderful to start it top down and bottom up at the same time, for governments and corporations to see the light and change the way this works. Because another factor of the way this works, the way I've designed it, is that you have to create, every producer has to produce all of the credit required to buy their product. Well, if I could produce something and sell it for $1,000, but it only cost me $10 to produce, now I have to find a way to give away $990, otherwise my business fails. You figure that out? I have two websites. I'm gonna wrap it up. I have two websites. It's a lot to take in. My one website is moneyasdebt.net, and the other one is digitalcoin.info. And on both of them you will find numerous essays that explain all of this proposal in detail, and my many attempts to make the twice lent money argument. Well, I don't know, I guess I've worn myself out. There was one other thing I wanted to deal with today, though, was before I leave, was the idea that you often hear that, oh, well, one of them is legal tender. People say, oh, if you don't accept legal tender, you go to jail. That's not the case. Legal tender law means that if somebody offers you payment in legal tender and you don't accept it, the court will consider you paid anyway. That's the only difference. You have to accept legal tender, the court won't enforce a debt. And the other one is the idea that interest is the cause of the problems in our society. And people say, well, you can't pay the interest because the bank never created it. But the bank doesn't have to create it, because you pay your interest in installments. And when you pay the bank the interest, you pay the bank the interest this month, the bank spends it, you can earn it again next month. People who always say, well, the $1,000 is created, but you have to pay $2,000 back. That's impossible. I'm sorry. I could pay an infinite amount of money back with $1,000. In fact, I'll never pay off the principal. I'll pay $100 a payment in interest. The bank spends the $100. I earn the $100 again. I pay it next month. I earn it again. I pay it next month, and it goes on forever. So the idea that there's a shortage of money to pay the interest is an absolute hallucination. And there's so many money reformers out there telling you that this is the cause of the problem. And I'm saying, no, it isn't. It's the fact that money's been lent twice. And that's the principle. The principle's been lent twice. You know, sometimes the banks might spend some of the interest, and that ruins the circularity of the system. But we all hold this I think that there's an enormous volume of money that was created as somebody's loan that was not available to them on time to pay it back. And that set up this circle like two stars orbiting each other. These two debts they're both mutually dependent. And so that any time that the borrowing of money slows down for any reason, and it should, right? Life is cyclical, nature is cyclical. Why wouldn't we expect the economy to go through cycles and not worry about it? But our system doesn't allow the cycle to go into the downside without us all losing our homes and collateral. And that is totally unjust, totally unfair, and totally dysfunctional. And these fools don't seem to realize why. Isn't it simple enough? Isn't that the $20 going through the crowd simple? I mean, I haven't had any trouble telling that to children, but I had spent 3 years trying to get economists to even look at it. And I'm so pleased to be able to announce that this past week, I may actually get my opportunity. Thank you.